Yeah, there we go. Okay. All right. Now, we're going to, as promised, this is the next session here, we're going to go into interest rates real quick and a little bit of banking history, and then the lending ratios. I'm going to keep this really kind of simple and just, well, let me kind of skip to a spoiler here. When you look at these two here, right here, insurance and inflation, these things here are, well, interest rates and insurance premiums are the same. They're actually the same deal. If you understand banking and insurance is just banking in reverse. It's the same scam done, the same business model done in reverse. But we're going to talk about interest rates here, but we have to do a little bit of housekeeping and go through the history of banking. So the idea behind a bank back in the day, let's be fair to fiat currency for just a second here. The idea of banking back in the day was that you had a small town. And a lot of the business owners in the town, maybe some of the professionals, would get together and they would start a bank. And the reason they would do that is because they wanted to grow they wanted to have money available to grow the economy because more people were being born. Remember, you had families that were having multiple kids. Remember, there was an expansion of people. So you had to have, availability of, you had to have some liquidity available, because you can't go build a house for people. You're a professional. You're a physician. You can't go build their houses with them. You got to be a physician. Well, but you could start a bank, and people, what they would do is they would borrow money, which is basically borrowing money on their future, right? So they're borrowing against their future earnings, and all things being equal, if assuming that there's no interest rates on it, because banks, when they create money, they don't create the interest to pay back the loan. They just create the principal. They don't create the interest. The interest doesn't exist. So, which is why bankruptcy is built into the system. In fact, it's in the word bankruptcy. It's in the title, right? And it's because there's no way to actually pay any of this back. It's why you keep seeing these insane deficits and all this crazy stuff, like all these numbers you keep seeing. What is $1 trillion of credit card debt? There's no way to pay it. There's no mathematical way to pay any of that back. There's no way. It's never going to be paid back. It's just going to keep getting bigger. So the idea is that you had a small bank, and then they would loan out enough money so people could build houses and buy farms and so on in their community, and they could expand, or they could open up a coffee shop or what have you. And what would happen is that the principals of the bank, what they would do is when they looked at a loan, they would look at it and say, okay, can the economy support this? If we do this loan, and for this guy who wants to open up a coffee shop, let's say, in a town, is there a glut of coffee shops? Is there 50 coffee shops? It's like a $6 on every corner. Everybody in the world going into a $6 to buy a tall boy frappuccino. So you've got this idea behind, like, you wouldn't want to do an economy where you just kept lending money to businesses that where you were going to saturate the market to the point where nobody made any money. So you would turn down that loan, right? If you were the 51st coffee shop in a town of 65 people or 650 people, you'd go, man, I don't know, we're not going to do this loan, because, well, that's how it would work. So the principals would do this kind of stuff. Now it's all done through computer algorithm, because most of the principals aren't as smart as they think they are. I'm just telling you how it is. Most of these people I know some of these folks, and a lot of them are where they are. They're not bad people. Don't misunderstand that. They're people that are second and third and even fourth generation trust fund kids. The mentality of a second, third, or fourth generation trust fund kid is the same as a second, third, or fourth generation welfare kid. It's the same mentality, right? They drive different cars, live in different houses, take different vacations, but it's the same basic mentality. They don't understand the relationship between me putting in a huge amount of time into something and expecting a return, of that time later on, right? That's the only, like I said, that's the only reason you work. You don't work because you have nothing to do. There's plenty of shit to do, right? You work because you work at a job that you don't like because you're being paid to do so. Right, and with the idea being, the understanding is, when I get my check, when I get my money, I get to exchange that for whatever it is I want to exchange it for. That's the deal. But if you're going to continue to devalue the currency, well, then I'm not going to work for that chicken shit amount of money. You're going to need to pay me a lot more money now, and that's what ends up happening. So just understand that that is what's happening right now, right? I mean, like, this is why I'm about out of patience with a lot of boomers on this for reasons I'll go into later on. But like, you guys have got to realize that when you destroy a currency like this, when it's devalued and again like every Ponzi schemes work great if you're constantly adding people, but as soon as you run out of people, it all falls apart. The US dollar is a giant Ponzi scheme. It's bigger than FTX. It's a big one. And when it finally collapses, musical chairs. You're going to have billions of people stuck without a chair when the music stops. So, but the history part of the banking aspect was that when you went in and you got this loan, it was a loan against your future earnings. They were conservative about it. They wanted to make sure that you were going to be able to not only pay it back, because you're paying back yourself, right? You understand that's how banking. The money doesn't exist. It's lent out at a 9-to-1 ratio, and the bank makes a spread. Okay, so if the bank has $1 million in it, right? Assuming that FTX doesn't just shove a bunch of money into some bank in the middle of nowhere in Washington, it's got $1 million. It can lend out about $9 million total in this example. Okay, so that means that, let's say that they lent the money out at, say, 5%. Well, they're making 5% on 9 million, not on 1 million, because 5% on $1 million is only $50,000. 5% on 9 million is $450,000. That means that the bank actually is incentivized. The principals are incentivized to keep the bank open, running, and profitable, and be able to pay people. And that's why when you go into these little towns, if you ever go through a little itty bitty town, you'll see that the nicest building is always a bank. It's always the cleanest. It's always the night. Well, yeah, it's because they're making money off everybody, and they have money coming in with little or no corresponding outgo of time. It's unsustainable, but it's what they do. So the interest rates, and you'll never get around the interest rates. By the way, you'll never get around it. You never get around interest rates. Interest rates are always going to be there when it comes to a fiat economy. Now, in a real economy, interest rates really, in the practical sense, can't exist. For example, in a Bitcoin economy, there's only 21 million Bitcoin units, so interest isn't really possible if you understand how that works. Like, you could try it, but eventually you're not going to get your money back. So, once again, you're going to be stuck in the opposite position. That Bitcoin won't collapse; it'll just collapse you. It will truly be greater fool. Whoever loans out the most money is going to lose, because you're probably never going to get it back, and you're certainly not going to get back with the interest. So it gets rid of that. It puts everything back into proper perspective of, hey, look, every generation should pay its own way as it goes, without causing a whole bunch of crazy debt. And and it's like, well, but we can't build all this infrastructure. Well, that's a lie, because I've seen the Amish put up barns in a day. I've watched it. There's YouTube videos of it. You can go on YouTube and you can look around and stuff. This is Amish people, and build an entire barn in one day, and you'll see a time lapse video of like 50 guys build an entire barn in one day. Well, and they're using old school material, old school ways of putting this. So we're not, they're not using like nail guns. I mean, if you're doing that, I mean, my God, how much faster could you be? So it's like, that's kind of a lie to suggest that like we can't do infrastructure without enormous amounts of debt. I don't buy that for a second. So that was sort of the history of where banking kind of came, the idea behind it. So to be fair to the fiat idea, if you had a bank that never inflated the currency, you could probably get away with it, only to the extent that when you eventually ran out of ways for people to pay interest, and then you either had to forgive the debts or you had to have your people file bankruptcy. The last people on the chain, right? This is again, just like every Ponzi scheme. It works great until you run out of people, or until the economy stops growing. Then it's, So now this, by the way, so you could say, look, well, but we could do a gold-backed economy. Well, let me skewer gold once and for all. By the way, I say this as a metalhead. Okay, I'm a fan of the yellow metal, but it's not going to work anymore. People don't have the stomach to hang bankers anymore for malfeasance. They just don't have the stomach to do it. Clearly, I mean, SBF is walking around doing whatever he wants, and nobody seems to care. So even though he stole billions of dollars, and it's perfectly okay, apparently, with all of society. So we just don't have the stomach to do these kinds of things any longer. So, and why won't gold work? Well, let me just explain it really quickly. Bank A, bank Bank B is over here. This is a horrible drawing. So this is Bank A and Bank B, and it's 1865. So we've got a gold economy. Things are kind of moving really well out in the West. Things are, hopping. And this bank here loans out, let's say, $100,000 worth of loans. And they have $100,000 worth of gold, which was 20 bucks an ounce back then, by the way. So they lent this out, no problem. Bank B has $100,000 worth of gold. They have lent out $200,000 worth of gold notes. This was not uncommon, by the way. This happened a lot. Well, the bank examiner goes here and he sees this and he's like, oh, everything is great. A plus, man. You're awesome. You guys get a smiley face. But then he goes all the way over to Bank B. Now what happens is that Bank B has no way of showing this. They have a deficit of 100 grand. So they immediately cable, over here to Bank A. Bank A takes their $100,000 of gold and runs it over here to Bank B as quickly as possible to put it in here into the coffers. By the way, Ponzi tried to do the exact same thing. He got caught. He tried to do it with, I think, $2.7 million or something from one bank to the next. He got caught. That's what imploded the Ponzi scheme, was he got caught doing that. So now this is the robbing Peter to pay Paul thing. So Bank A sends this 100 grand over here. Now Bank Examiner gets here and they're like, oh my gosh, you have 200. A plus, man. You guys are awesome. You get a smiley face. That's what happens. And then Bank B then sends the gold back over here. There's a reason why there's something called a lender of last resort. You can look it up on your own. What is a lender of last resort? It's when banks do stupid shit like this. That's all it is. So instead of this guy going, the guy who ran this bank, Bank B, is supposed to, he should have gone to the gallows. And that's where he should have been. Right? In front of all the people that he ripped off. SBF style. So that's what should have happened, but that's not what happened. This is why you can't do gold again. That's why you can't. You have no way of knowing who has a claim on that gold. Well, we can do checks and balances, digital gold. That's even worse. Then you don't even have to run the gold to someplace else. You just take it from one vault to the next. I mean, that's actually even worse. It's why it won't work anymore. It's why it's a cool idea. I love the idea of being able to knock over a stagecoach, full of gold. That'd be awesome. I mean, we could go back to the old days. We could wear, we could wear like, cowboy outfits and everything. Except we'll have like AR-15s that nobody's going to use. So, I love this whole idea of being able to knock off a stagecoach, with 100 grand worth of gold and everything, and make sure they can't get here. Then this guy is completely screwed, and this bank is completely screwed, and they both collapse. It's a great idea. By the way, there's a lot of outlaws, I imagine, that tried exactly that exact game back in the Old West in the U.S. But instead of that happening, it's easier just to not let it happen at all. Which puts us into the idea of Bitcoin, not crypto, not proof of stake crap. Bitcoin, because it has the same properties of gold in that it takes an amount of energy to mine Bitcoin. The same thing that, if you notice, remember, your life being finite has time on it, right? Remember, whatever it is, because of that, that's what gives it its value. Because if you lived forever, you could do whatever you want. You could go be a slave for 50,000 years. And then, after 50,000 years, go do something else, and go do this, and you can do whatever you wanted to. But because your time is finite, you have to make some choices. And you have to and so it automatically has value. It has value to you, right? Now, it's subjective, albeit subjective. Some people's time is, to them is worth more than others, but, still. So, all of that said, that's how banking, that's why gold won't work anymore. And that's why trust, the trusted third party, here's your trusted third party right here. This guy right there. There's your trusted third party. They don't exist. There is no such thing as a trusted third party. All it takes is a slight error in math. Like, well, but we could put checks and balances. No, no. You need to have checks and balances that solve the problem with everybody, and that everybody can audit everybody at all times. You know, it doesn't mean you have to know exactly what somebody purchased, but you can see that the transaction took place, and that we all agreed that that transaction happened. That's what, you know, Nakamoto-san solved. So, you know, whoever they are, because it's a group of people, I'm sure. So that, in a nutshell, is banking. Let me take my time here. Or I'm good. I can do insurance premiums. So let me add insurance here to this. Insurance is banking done in reverse. It's the same basic idea if you understand how it works. So insurance, you prepay for a loan, and then when you have a claim, you're like, oh my gosh, I have a claim, something happened. Well, then you have to go lawyer up and sue them to give you the money that they promised to give you in the first place, right? So they, you know, you prepay for the loan. So instead of you getting a loan of whatever, $100,000, $200,000, or whatever it is, you have insurance for $100,000, $200,000. And then when something happens, right, they're supposed to give the the loan to you, and then they raise your premiums, right? And what they do is they actually do the same thing that, you know, every other socialist thing does. They privatize gains, socialize the losses. That's how it works. Everybody gets to have the loss, but the gains are always privatized. They always go to a core nucleus of people, and that nucleus is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. You'll notice that there aren't very many insurance underwriters any longer. Well, but there's lots of agencies all over the place. Those are agents. Those are salespeople. That's really all they are. They have licenses and they sell stuff. That's their job. I'm not criticizing it. It just is. But they're not the underwriters. It's not their money personally at stake. It's the money of the giant underwriter. Now, and most of those, if you look at them, if you were to look it up, a lot of insurance companies, the big mega carriers and the big banks, a lot of them they're the same people. So insurance. This is if you understand the way this works, insurance, inflation, income tax, and interest rates, these are all controlled effectively by the same people. All four of these things. So you're like, well, but what about taxes? You know, like, well, taxes is government, isn't it? Well, yeah, taxes is what you get to pay back interest on loans that the government made to pay for a war they couldn't afford to fight. A war on whatever, it doesn't make any difference. Or to pay for a bunch of welfare that they had no business offering. This is just how it works, right? If you don't have any money, so what you do is you know, if you're a government, you just go to the Fed and you borrow it. Remember, a dollar only exists. This is going to sound really weird, and you're going to think I'm making this up. For some of you younger people, you're going to think I'm totally making this up. I'm really not. In order for a dollar to exist, right, someone has to be willing to borrow the dollar. So it doesn't exist. You have to be willing to borrow the dollar first, then it exists. Right? It's sort of it's sort of like godlike in that respect, right? You know, picture a guy in the clouds with a long white beard, looks like Billy Gibbons, and he just speaks the dollar into existence. That's the U.S. dollar. That's why it's so worthless. That's why it's garbage. So these things here are all connected, and the taxes is the price you pay, not for civilization. That's not I mean, come on. No, taxes is the price you pay because they keep borrowing more and more money on the future of the population. Remember, this always comes back to this, and it's not because I'm a demographer, but because you have to see this for what it is. Demographics is an issue. It is important that you understand it. That when you know this, and it's not a race issue, it's just people counting. That's all I'm talking about. So you have to look at the amount of people that, if your birth rate is collapsing, and it is, for whatever reason, you know, look, politics aside, we all know why it's collapsing. We've got a bunch of people telling a bunch of women to be as unattractive as possible, and then if they get married and they decide they don't want to be in the relationship anymore, take everything the guy has. Well, of course your population is going to implode. I mean, it's like you've disincentivized the whole idea of getting married and having kids and populating, being fruitful and multiplying, right? You've disincentivized it. This is not a political stance. It's a financial stance that I'm taking. So when you have a population that's decreasing, you have less tax revenue coming in, which means that you need more debt, which means you need more taxes, which means more debt. It's a vicious spiral, and the people that are running all of this, they have really no idea what they're doing. They don't know how to get out of it. I'm convinced. Let me be charitable here. Let's assume that this whole thing isn't just a big scam to get everybody's money. Let's assume it for a second here. Be charitable. How do they get out of this? Once again, my solution would be to say, well, realize that you made a horrible error and be honest with everybody and explain to the American people, hey, you've been had. Sorry. There's no way to pay any of these ridiculous pensions. There's no way to pay any of this debt. And we're just going to let all the banks go under, and we're just going to collapse the whole thing, which is going to take down, by the way, it's going to take down China, India, pretty much every other country with it. Every puppet dictatorship that the U.S. has put in power all over the world, it's going to pretty much collapse all those guys. And it's going to take us back to the Stone Age. Well, yeah. Yeah, if you remember in the very first video I did, the primer video, I explained that this is all an illusion. I wasn't joking. It's like a Penn and Teller act. All of this stuff that you're seeing is an illusion. You get rid of the illusion, and all of a sudden, all this stuff goes away. All of it. Now, the infrastructure stays. That's the positive thing. The infrastructure stays. So that means that you could actually have the possibility of having a real economy, but you have to then decide, do you want a real economy? Or do you want to just go back to another fake economy? So that's the relationship within these. I'll come back and I'll give an example in the next video. I'll do my Disneyland analogy so that you can kind of understand a little bit better, maybe a little bit better by giving you an analogy of how that system works.